Have you ever dejunked your house? Have you ever dejunked your house? You tried to? Have you ever dejunked your house? Where you go through drawers and root around and find things. Oh my goodness, I haven't used this for 2 decades. Time to say goodbye to this. A while back, I was dejunking a little bit, and I found something in a drawer that wasn't quite 2 decades old, but it's getting there. I found my college ID, my college student identification card with my picture on there that said I was a student of this specific year. It was my senior at Erskine College student ID. And I looked at it, and I looked at the picture, looked at myself, and said, yeah, I remember this thing. I used to get in movies cheaply with this thing. I used to get a student discount with this thing, and I only had to pay $5 to go to the movies, I remembered. And then my brain, as I continued to look at the photo, I said, I still kind of look like that. A little bit. Sort of. I'm 37 now, just turned 37. I look a little bit like I did back then, maybe. And then I looked at the date. That was 2005. That's ancient history. That ID isn't going to be useful to me anymore. No one in their right mind would give me a discount on a movie ticket. You're not a student anymore, Matt. You're ancient history, they would say. And today, as we approach this portion of Daniel with all of the facts and information and people and kings and all that stuff, it's easy for us to look at the Old Testament and say, wow, that's ancient history. That's ancient history. That's older than 2005. That can't be useful to us anymore. That's ancient history. This passage is full of ancient history, and we're actually doing something that we've never done before, at least during my tenure here. We're going to be doing a 4-part sermon. But it will actually be split over 2 weeks. So we're only going to do 2 of the points today, and we'll do the other 2 next week because this portion of Daniel is all connected, but it's so many verses that I think we'd be doing this passage a disservice if we tried to tackle it all in one go. So this will be a 4-part split over 2 weeks. Have you ever seen a sloth in person? Have you ever seen one in person? I have. It was an amazing thing. They've got the little toes, and what do you know about sloths? If I was to ask, what do you think of them? What's the one thing? Lazy is what I think of. That's what I was told. Slow, yeah, lazy sloth. I was amazed when I saw one. Yeah, it's slow. But it was moving all the time. It wasn't lazy. It never kicked back and said, yeah, all right. It was always slowly moving, slowly reaching to the next branch, always moving, always active. In fact, I did a little bit of research and found that sloths aren't lazy at all. They actually move 12 hours out of the day. I don't believe anyone in here is moving 12 hours straight. Sloths aren't lazy, they're just really, really slow. You have to pay attention to notice that they're moving, but they're constantly moving. And that's a point to help us as we approach this passage of Daniel. The Old Testament, portions of it may seem really slow. It may seem slow, but that just means we have to pay attention. Because the Old Testament is full of God moving, constant actions of God. And that's our first point of this 4-part, 2-week sermon series. The first point is an easy one, I think. God is active. We have to pay attention to see just how active God is. Look at verse 1 here. We get this angelic messenger that we learned about last week from chapter 10. Remember the terrifying vision of a man? He's still talking. This isn't Daniel speaking here. This is the angelic messenger, because remember, the chapter breaks are human invention. We put the bold-faced heading up there at the top to say what's happening. We did chapter 10, chapter 11. That's us. This is the same divine messenger speaking from chapter 10. And what does he start out by saying? In the first year of Darius the Mede. That was a significant year. We already actually talked about that. I'm just giving us a little background. This is a significant year because, like we already said, the Hebrew people are getting ready to go home. They've begun going home. They've started going back to the land that they've been exiled from. So this is good news. We already talked about that, but there's some new news. If you remember from that terrifying vision of the man from last week, we saw that there were evil, demonic forces upholding kingdoms in their resisting God's will, in their damage of God's people. But here we see positive supernatural forces. Because look what this messenger says. This is not Darius alone doing this good thing. This messenger says, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. So it's not only Darius doing a good thing, but he's getting divine assistance. God is moving. God is active in that good thing. And we get a detailed accounting next of God moving in the near future for the Hebrew people. And historians have been able, through painstaking research, have been able to connect this prophecy, these words, the next 19 verses, with true people and actual historical events. Started in verse 2. 3 more kings arise after Cyrus in Persia. 3 more kings. And we actually have been able to figure out who those possibly and likely who those 3 kings are. But then after those 3 kings, we get a 4th one. A one richer than all the others. And one in his richness and in his power is a mighty king, and he brings conflict to Greece. And it's very likely that this is the Persian king Xerxes. You may have heard of him. He's actually Esther's husband from the book of Esther. But he did something else in his power. He brought an army, some historians think as many as 1 million people in his army he brought to invade Greece. Of the Battle of Thermopylae, you may know the Battle of the 300 as they resisted that army of 1 million. But this Xerxes, this mighty Persian king, doesn't last very long, does he? Verse 3. A mighty king steps up to bring him down. Bring down the Persian Empire and build a great dominion. We've talked about this guy before multiple times. This is most likely, again, Alexander the Great. But how long was Alexander the Great's reign? Quickly, he conquered the known world. No one could stand against him, but no sooner had he conquered the known world and wept because there were no more worlds to conquer, he died. He died. And we get that in verse 4. As soon as the risen kingdom happens, it's broken and divided amongst the 4 winds. And we know that Alexander's empire was divided amongst his 4 generals. We know that. But none of them were his posterity, just like it says here. These weren't his children. These were just his generals. They weren't of his lineage. But that's just the precursor to this, isn't it? Because verses 5 through 20, we get more information about the kings of the north and the kings of the south. The kingdom of the north and the kingdom of the south. The king of the south the first one would be actually one of Alexander's generals. That would be Ptolemy, who took up residence in Egypt. And then we get the king of the north, which would be actually a minion of Ptolemy who grew to be stronger than him. A guy named Seleucus, who was king in Syria and Babylon, making him king in the north. Are you seeing this detail? Are you starting to notice just how much is being described here by this messenger? And we get so many verses dealing with these 2 kingdoms, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, because for the near future, that's where God's going to be working. Because for the near future, the Israelite people are going to be at the mercy of these 2 kingdoms. They're actually going to be stuck between them as they fight back and forth, north and south. Which should sound familiar to us in Georgia. As the north and the south fight, that's where God is going to be moving, because these 2 kingdoms hold influence over his people. And in verse 6, the historical connections continue. We get the language about this southern king's daughter coming to the north to make an agreement. We have a historical connection there. Her name was Bernice. Princess Bernice came to marry the king of the north and try to form an alliance. But as predicted here, what happened to Bernice? She shall not retain the strength, and her arm shall not endure, nor he who supports her. And actually, there was a problem with Bernice's marriage of alliance. The king of the north was already married. And his current wife didn't want him to marry anyone named Bernice or any new wife at all. So she not only poisoned and killed Bernice, she also poisoned and killed the king in the north, which is predicted here. The northern king's other wife had them both poisoned. And as if that wasn't enough detail to show us God knew what was going to happen, not only shall she be given up, that means dead, he who bore her also. And we have historical evidence that her father, the king in the south, also died back in Egypt shortly after she was assassinated. And we could go on and on with this, because believe it or not, we still have 14 more verses of the history of the kings of the south and the kings of the north, discussing this Seleucid and Ptolemy history, because it's connected to Israel, and we get this incredible detail here. And for those of you who are interested, I can recommend commentaries. And I encourage you to spend your time off making the historical connections here. Because historians have been able to find real connections to real people. But you may have no interest in any of this. You may say, wow, that's a lot of boring history and a lot of people's names I've never met. I don't know anyone named Bernice. Let's move on from this. You may have no interest in that. You may be sitting there saying, thanks for the history lesson, but the Old Testament still seems pretty irrelevant to me. I don't know Bernice. I'm not going to cry for her assassination several thousand years ago. Today, look beneath the surface facts and notice what the details are really telling us. These are predictive details. This stuff hadn't happened yet. When this messenger brings these words to Daniel, none of these assassinations, none of these wars, none of this had actually taken place. These details are so specific, and as I said, historians are pretty well united who these things are talking about. And this predicted detail is so specific that some text critics have actually used this passage to claim that it must have been written well after Daniel's life. They said no one could have known this far in advance this level of historical detail. No one could guess the future this accurately. But remember what we read during worship from Isaiah 44. This was actually our call to worship. You'll find it in your bulletin. What did we read from our call to worship? In Isaiah 44, Isaiah asserts that God has the ability to declare his actions. In fact, his people, through God, can declare God's actions before time, ahead of time. But we might still be jaded and say that's not helpful either, because Isaiah himself predicted stuff before his time. To the extent that some text critics have also said that there couldn't be one Isaiah, there have to be 3 authors of Isaiah, because nobody could predict the future this accurately. To find relevance in this dusty Old Testament passage, to find relevance in these predictions, we have to really quickly ask 3 questions. And just jot off through your head here what you're thinking when I ask these questions. You don't have to yell it out. First one, does God know what will happen? Second question, you have to ask these Old Testament predictions. First you ask, does God know what will happen? Second ask, is God active when it happens? And here's the third one. This is the hardest one. Are you ready for this one? This is the third one. Where is the information in this passage coming from? Is this a divine messenger giving this info? Or is this a creative author's imagination? Is Daniel really speaking to an angelic messenger, or is this Daniel's imagination? For the Old Testament to have value and relevance hinges directly on who you believe wrote the words in the Old Testament. Who you believe wrote it. You have to see this morning how important this is to your personal faith. Because this angel is saying that God knows and is active in what is happening. So keep thinking about those three questions as we move forward. Here's another question. Have you ever shopped at Costco? Have you ever been a shopper at Costco? Have you heard of it? It's like the Target version of Sam's or something like that. And Costco, a while back, released a survival line. Survival food. Survival things. There a while back, I remember it distinctly during Y2K, as we were about to go to 2000, people started collecting food and building cellars, and you may remember all of that. Well, Costco's jumped on the bandwagon, and they have released a survival line of food. They have a survival line, and their survival line includes a 27-pound bucket of macaroni and cheese that costs $90. And this 27-pound bucket of $90 macaroni and cheese is guaranteed to have a value and shelf life for 20 years. Now, for you to be willing to go to Costco and spend $90 to buy 27 pounds of macaroni and cheese at one time, what is necessary? You have to believe that food could become scarce within 20 years, right? Or just really love macaroni and cheese and eat 27 pounds of it at a time. You have to believe that that shelf life has value for you to go out and invest in that. But make the connection here. For the Old Testament to be relevant, you must see that God doesn't have a shelf life. There's no 20-year limit on God. There's no $90 limit on God. He is at work in all the changing times on an unchanging salvation mission. And that's our second point today. God is active in your near future. Not only is God active in this dusty stuff here, God is active in the near future events. And that's what we're getting in verses 1 and 2. The Israelites are getting sent home, yeah. But when they get home, what's going to happen? This isn't freedom they've won for themselves. They didn't overcome the Persian Empire to get to go home. No, they're getting sent home as tributaries. They're going to be tributaries for more Persian kings, 4 more Persian kings to come. How is this what's best for Israel? Then they're going to be divided up and part of Alexander the Great's conquests. How is this best for Israel? Then they're going to get split between 2 kingdoms. How is this best for Israel? Then they're going to get stuck between the 2 kingdoms who are constantly at war, fighting. You heard all that stuff about fortresses and siege implements and assassinations. How's getting stuck between that best for Israel? And then in verse 20, how did we end up? We ended up with the king establishing the king in the north, setting up his son as a tax collector over them. How is this best for Israel? If you believe that God is active and believe that God is active in near future events, then you may want to question, how is God working in them? What's he doing? If you believe God is in control, then you might want to ask, how is God caring for his people? What's the point of all this? God's people need to see ourselves through the lens of the broader scope of the salvation story. Because God is active in difficulty, creating perfection. He took a nobody named Abram Before he'd even renamed him Abraham, Abram was just some guy sitting on a rock, and God took him before he'd ever had any children, promised that his line would be a chosen people. And through his line, he would bless the entire earth. Don't see this as just a prediction of difficulty for God's people. Don't see this as just a difficulty. They're going home. They're getting to go back to their land was predicted by God. This is a good thing. Their going home is a sign that God is moving. That his people are moving into the next phase of the Abrahamic promise. The next chapter in the salvation story, that they're moving on to the nations being blessed by that Messiah in Abraham's family line. These difficulties don't end God's promise, no matter which kingdom is at war or who they're paying taxes to. See that difficulty doesn't mean God has stopped working. These are difficulties, sure, but difficulty doesn't mean God has stopped working. How can I prove that to you this morning? Who was that Messiah in Abraham's line? How are all the nations being blessed? How were they to be blessed? Because God was active in the difficulty Christ faced on the cross, creating perfection for you. Creating perfect salvation for you. God was active in that difficulty. And see here in this passage that the near future does not limit the Anointed One, Daniel writes of, does not limit the Messiah, does not limit the Christ for God's people. As we get closer and closer to 2020, and we are getting closer and closer, I hear more and more people, both personally and on television and on the internet, discussing who's going to be our next president. And I hear people debating, who's it going to be? How's this going to work out? Who is going to beat who? Who could beat who? Who's going to do what when they are in office? And as I hear people debating who's going to be president, I hear more people complaining about the voters' options, feeling discouraged by what's going on in this country. Because we're surrounded by societal decay. And it doesn't seem like any elected official can do anything about it. It doesn't seem like things are getting better. But see that no matter who is elected, it does not end God's promises for God's people. Believe God is active in difficulty, creating perfection. But this isn't just on the national level. This happens on the local level. When Sarah and I first moved to Cedartown, what did we have to do? Well, lots of things. Other than move in, we had to get license plates, right? Which is an expensive proposition if you're moving to Georgia, because you have to repay the sales tax of your car to get a license plate. And we picked the In God We Trust license plates instead of the Polk County license plates, because we like the sound of that, In God We Trust. And we said, does it cost any more? And they said, no. And we said, well, we want In God We Trust. And the guy standing behind us in line said, yeah, get it while it lasts. He doesn't believe we're going to be a nation or a state who trusts in God very much longer. And we need to take the message of this passage directly into our heart, that God is active regardless of what is happening. Even if we can't sing God Bless America during the 7th inning stretch, even if they take In God We Trust off our license plate, those are short-term difficulties. Believe today that God is active in that near future. Concern yourself with your eternal position with God. And take comfort that the near future does not change Christ's perfection. The perfect salvation He's offering for you. Let's pray together. Dear Heavenly Father, help us today. Help us to realize that the Old Testament has value because it proclaims salvation through your power. Help us to look past our current and near future